All right, so we have this painting here, which is a pretty decent painting. This is kind of what we see a lot in sort of open studios, kind of a higher level. Most of the shapes are kind of figured out. Looks pretty good. The flesh tone could be a little more colorful, but it's actually pretty solid, at least solid enough for us to touch up here or there. So there's just a few things that we would want to consider how to make this painting better. Right now we have the proportions check out. The model's looking a little bit down, so the chin to nose is a little bit shorter than the nose to the eyebrow, which is a little bit shorter than the eyebrow to the hairline. So those proportions check out. So then there's just a few things we can tweak in here to make this a little better. First of all, the forehead looks a little flat, so we might want to add some information there, either value or color, if we can do color. We don't have the model here, so we'll just do the best we can. We see this a lot, sort of the overemphasis on the upper lateral cartilage, which reads kind of just as a line right down the nose. It makes the nose look a little too flat and kind of just pronounced from the front of the face, less sort of a gradual transition. And then here we have a really kind of hard and really sharp edge transition from the light to the shadow that we might want to consider touching up a little bit. And then also a classic kind of whites of the eyes are a little too white, and they definitely need to come down for this to kind of resolve itself. And then if there's time, we might add a little more information to the hair. But first things first, we should take a look at these eyes. We can never have these eyes this light. If the eyes were that light, we would definitely need to be modeling quite a bit more in those eyes, a little bit more information, and a little bit more variety of edges. This eye was actually okay, although we could soften out some of these edges a little bit more with some color in here. We can get away with having this little information in eyes, especially with an alla prima, but you can't overstate the information in there unless it's really backed up with some good modeling and putting context to the rest of the painting. And we need a little more color in the shadows. Unfortunately, the shadows got a little bit flat on some of this in here. It's like this guy here, we need a little more color, a little more of a yellowish red in there. Now I remember the colors because I painted the model too. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to make nearly as good of color decisions. I'd have to basically just stick to a shadow color that's consistent with the whole painting and then sort of apply that all the way around to make it look continuous. So for example, the shadows here were a little too dark and a little too kind of neutral grayish black, and they didn't really fit in with some of the other colors. So just by pushing them towards the other colors, it helps them read a little bit stronger. Next, I'm going to look at some of this nose here. Actually, we'll do the forehead. We'll do the forehead next. Does anybody remember the color zones of the face?
Forehead's
Forehead's
yellow.
yellow, cheeks are red, and then the chin is blue.
Okay, good, yeah. And we kind of have some indication of this. We got some of the sort of bluish, grayish, greenish around the cheeks there. It's got a little pink in those cheeks here. And then the forehead is kind of all over, so we can kind of push it a little more in one direction and help it hit more of a color family there, and then hopefully by deepening it, make it look a little more round and a little more dimensional. I'm just going in with pure paint, which was what was used to paint this. And it actually has a nice buttery feel to it. It's good paint. Is this the Michael Harding paint?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go a little darker around those edges. See just a little bit here on the sides, and then in by the keystone is going to help to turn a lot of the form in the forehead, make it look a lot more dimensional. And it didn't require much. And this is, again, this is one of those hard things to lock in on, especially for a student. It's easy enough, with a good amount of drawing experience, to be able to get the basic value relationships, kind of the poster study amount of value relationships on a portrait, but then to break that down when it's really just a sensitive, subtle turn is much more challenging. And that's some of the value transitions we have here. They're really like half steps. But you do have to become more sensitive to them. And if you're jumping all over the painting, that can be really hard to do because it does require that you kind of slow down and just be patient and a little more observant in one area and just keep bouncing around one area, relating values and colors to each other. So, looking at the highlight versus the keystone versus the sides and trying to find like a really precise division of where those values should shift and turn. That's a hard edge on that forehead there. There's also not too much color in your eyebrows, so we might need to put just a little in, maybe back here. You don't want your eyebrows to read as lines drawn on. That happens quite a bit, so do make sure you get enough color in the eyebrows. I see that kind of neglected a lot, and there's usually some more variation. It's broken up. If you see some of the jagged quality, it's usually because there's a broken edge there. Get some of the side of the nose now. So we need to get rid of these lines here. And typically, and this is something we looked at yesterday, the lighter light of that nose appears that way because the lower lateral cartilages are a little bit darker, and so we have a tendency to over-exaggerate both. We make the front of the nose too light and we make the lower lateral cartilages too dark. But what we should instead do is consider how the side planes of the nose feed into the cheek. There's like skin that goes from the cheek up into that nose and actually creates kind of a gradual transition. And if we think of it that way, then you can kind of paint or draw following right along that line of understanding so that it swoops from the nose down into the cheek and softens that out. And then we'll add a highlight of the nose on top of it, and it will look more dimensional and stronger. See, before the cheeks just kind of looked flat, like one flat plane, but the cheeks aren't a flat plane. They wrap around and then up into the nose. So we want to make sure that it takes on that quality. And then we can start adding the front of the nose in. But you see how understated the side values are to that plane of the nose? But now when we add the light on top of it, it's going to make these appear darker, like you had kind of indicated it. It just wasn't quite the right ratio and mix, and you kind of had oversimplified that side plane to be just sort of one stroke.
Are you trying to keep your strokes separate at this point? We're talking about that blending.
Now there's enough paint on here that I'm kind of painting strokes into strokes. So they're kind of softly blending. And I'm using a firmer brush than what was used to paint this. This is an evergreen brush by Rosemary, and it's a little better for paint loading. And because it's a little denser than the Combers, it allows for a little bit more control. There we go.
So you find you using the evergreens when there's more body? When you're working with more body?
Yeah, typically. Although I did mine all today with the Combers. But yeah, usually when I'm painting a head that's more solid, and I'm trying to get more paint buildup, I will use the evergreens. We'll even knock some of that down just a little bit more. So just be really careful when you state the side planes of the nose. Get them a little bit more specific. And then if you do want to put that light in for the broad side of the nose, make sure you really control the, how much you're putting it in, how thick it is, both the thickness of the paint and also the width of the stroke. Normally you'd want to go in here and get a really fine stroke like that, so that it doesn't overpower the nose. It should really read as a highlight because that's where the light is sitting on top of the bone there. But note, when you look close enough at the nose, that there are several little value transitions that are happening there on the nose that we don't really see it at first glance, and that's why that nose gets oversimplified too much. Okay. And then we needed to address the chin here. That chin is really hard. I'm going to go in with some of this bluish, purplish, greenish color here and start to slice a few pieces of color in here to help facilitate a transition. We want it to read as a fairly abrupt change, meaning we don't want to soften anything out. So it's just about selecting just the right color to help turn that form. And you did it really nicely over here, so you just needed some of that down there. And you could probably even lift some of the values in the mouth here. Got a little dark. Especially this bottom lip here. And you want to make sure you keep that value transition from the lip into the surrounding flesh there. You don't want that lower lip to look too outlined. That's pretty good. I think most of your values in here are nice. Yeah. I think overall it's reading pretty nicely. With the value that all of the lights are, you can go lighter in the darks. I know the shadows are pretty dark up there, but again, it's about the relationship of the lights of the flesh to the dark of the flesh. So you may have painted the shadows to be the accurate value to what we're actually up there, but it's not the correct jump in values to the lights. So we can use this opportunity to introduce more color into those shadows. And typically the more color you get in there, the more vibrant they're going to look, all those shadows. Get a little more confident in some of these transitions. So it'll also look better if you actually get some hard edges around the face. Right now, all of the edges around the face are a little ambiguous, like almost as though you're too timid to state them. And in some cases, it's almost better to state them and be a little wrong than leave them too frothy or undescribed. Because in that situation, it just has a sort of unresolved look to the picture, when we could instead just hypothesize where the edge would be in this case, since the model's not there. And now we can foil, that now that we have a harder edge in there, we can start foiling and making some softer edges and helping the model fade into some of the surrounding. We can do some of her hair too. She had this nice kind of golden hair color. I think overall your flesh tones are nice, but this is also a situation where the background that's been toned is so brown that it is kind of keying to the model, but it's making the flesh tone look not as vibrant as it could otherwise look if we were to just increase some of the color in that background. Maybe change it a little from the brown. Yeah, since you put enough body paint on here, the edges are really workable right now. They're just setting up to get a kind of nice tacky stage. So they can be brushed really well and kind of pushed and molded a little bit without ruining the color quality of the strokes. It's a good consistency for the paint. Should we change the background up? What do you think?
Yeah, go for it.
Need to tie that ear color into the portrait a little more. We could also hit up some of the reflected light. You started to indicate it, but we could actually even push it a little bit more to help this start to glow. She really started to get some of it down here on the jaw also. Just setting that in there helps all those colors sing a little bit more. So just adding color in there really pumps up the whole glow of the piece. So whenever you can, try to fuse a little bit more color in. Values help get a good structure to make things look solid, but colors help things glow.
So you just keep your color in the correct value.
That's right, and then you can play around with it. Yeah, and then we can, I can lock in onto a color that I am identifying in here, like kind of the red, and then just boost the chroma, and then the whole shadow looks like it starts to come alive.
But you can't do that until your lights are worked out, brought up to a level that's...
You can kind of do that whenever.
No.
Yeah. And in fact, it may help prevent you from making your lights too chalky, because the lights start to look more colorful when they're put in context next to a colorful shadow. Whereas if we neglect the shadow, then sometimes the lights tend to look really flat. Get a little optical blue color right around here.
And in some cases, it looks like you're doing a light veil before you apply a darker color on it. Is that to keep the value consistent?
Yeah, in some cases, I'm just kind of testing out the value when I put something in, and usually it's wrong. Almost every time it's wrong the first time I put it in. So then I have to go back and adjust it. There's nothing wrong with it being wrong. We use that as a means to figure out how to make it correct So if we shift this background to more of a cooler blue, then all these yellows are going to stand out and look so much nicer. You know, I used to have this misconception, I think probably a lot of people do, that if you foil colorful colors against dead, muddy, or dulled down colors, then those colorful colors look more intense. That's kind of true if it's a true neutral, like if it's a gray. If you have a painting that's almost all gray, and then you pop it with a color, then that color sings. That's what we see with the naturalist paintings. But I tended, and I see a lot of people tend to misinterpret the sort of gray or low chroma as like a brown, like this kind of toning. Like that's not low chroma. That actually has a lot of chroma. It's just red, yellow shifted. It's brown. It's a low chroma red, yellow. And so that just makes things look muddy. Whereas if you get a gray back there, then this yellow starts to pop out. Or like what I'm doing now, which is putting more color in. More color plays off of more color. And it just really builds the color of a scene. And in this case, it's really just choosing, you know, I'm opting for a blue base or a more gray. You know, if you isolate this, it's almost a perfect gray. But it looks so blue compared to the yellow. And it just makes all of those flesh tones start to sing. Notice I'll keep it a little transparent here so that it still reads as, you know, background. I can even pick some of those little pieces of hair. Have it look a little more natural, a little more intentional. And here I'm just relying on my aesthetic sense of design, kind of what I've done before, what I remember, and then also integration, this idea of how do I make it look like this figure belongs on this canvas, you know, getting just the right amount of diffusion versus hard edge. It's kind of an art in and of itself. That's why we look at some paintings that are vignetted and they look just so beautiful and so perfect, even though, you know, it's just a little piece of something on a relatively blank canvas. You know, that's good design. You really have to study that.
You're mixing the skin tones with the gray you have to kind of disseminate it?
No, I'm just doing more background now.
Okay.
When you were trying to integrate the,
Oh yeah, there I was just
Yeah, that's
mixing
what
more flesh tone.
The camera's low on battery.
Okay, that's perfect timing. So that's pretty much it. Notice I varied some brush work back here, got a little kind of dry brush look, got some claw marks in there. Maybe I'll knock this down just a little. I like the idea of a hard edge up there, but that's a little intense. Break into some of those pieces there. There we go. And lean way back and let my eyes go out of focus to make sure I haven't missed anything.